Hi, thanks for tuning in today to another Front Porch Conversation here at Advent Christian Village. I have with me today Diane Law. And Diane, you live in Riverwoods here, is that right?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're so glad that you're going to take part today, and others will get to know you better from this.
Thank you.
Where were you born, Diane?
I was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida, on the west side.
We today you're number 88 of our Front Porch Conversations, and towards the latter interviews, we're getting a few more Floridians interviewed, and I'm a native Floridian also. So welcome.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
okay.
I was born in Jacksonville also.
Okay.
So you grew up there and went to school?
I did. Born at St. Vincent's Hospital.
Me too.
I thought you might have if you said that. Yes, I lived there until I got married. Went to school there, graduated from Paxson High School, got more education in business from JU.
Which is
I worked
Jacksonville
there.
University?
Yes. I worked there until I married, and then sometime a little later, my husband's company transferred him to Brunswick, Georgia. So that's when we made our first move out of Florida.
And not too far?
No, not far.
How did you and your husband meet?
I actually, while I was going to school, I had a summer that I was on staff at Glorieta Baptist Assembly in New Mexico. And then later on, 2 years later, I was on staff at Ridgecrest Baptist Assembly, which is in Asheville, North Carolina.
I know where that is.
Yeah. And when I came home from that summer, there was a young man at my church that I did not know. He had moved there with his job. He was living with his brother, his older brother, who was 18 years older. Oh, wow. Yeah. They were all in my church, so we got to know each other real quickly. And I thought for many years that my calling was going to be in missions. But when I got back home and Larry and I began to know each other, later on engaged, I realized that that was not going to be my mission. It was going to be in another area, but not that one. Mm-hmm. So we actually met at church.
And what church was that?
Marietta Baptist Church.
You never know. Somebody watching may have grown up at that
true.
church too. So that's why I always like to ask.
Yeah.
And how long did you date and were engaged?
We dated probably close to a year. Then we became engaged, and we were engaged for a year. Mm-hmm.
And were you married at the Marietta Baptist Church also?
Yes. Uh-huh.
During your time at JU, did you work as well?
Some, off and on, yeah. Mm-hmm. But no long term.
What are some of your favorite childhood memories?
Oh, goodness. Well, we lived way out in the country, so we did a lot of things that included animals. They weren't always my favorite, but we had them. And my parents really believed in giving us exposure. So many summers, they would plan things for us to do and go. My parents were campers, so we would all five of us manage to get in one of these campers that just folded out. But you know, there was seemingly plenty of room by the time we got up and got out and were busy hiking and doing other things. It didn't seem to matter when we laid down at night. So I had a wonderful childhood. I really did. I had great mother and dad, and they were together many, many years. My dad passed away, and then some years later, my mother actually moved here to the village.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. She was in Dowling House to begin with, and then she did that progression of Dossier Manor and then the nursing home. Mm-hmm.
So for me to ask you the question, how did you learn about Advent Christian Village?
Well, actually, I knew about it a good while before my mother moved here. My husband was actually a Baptist pastor, and we were actually pastoring churches in this area. And he would come over every week and do a Bible study at Dowling House. There was a group of ladies that were in our church in Mayo, and they all lived here at the village. So he would come over and do a Bible study for them every week. But since he grew up in this area, he knew about the village from the time he was a young man. So it's always been kind of on the back of our minds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You said his job transferred him to Jacksonville.
Yes.
At what point did he go into the ministry or feel a call to the ministry?
Actually, we married. We moved to Ocala, Florida, where he was actually in the restaurant business. We had 3 children. He always felt that the Lord had called him at the young age of 16. But he said, I grew up on a farm. We never had much, although we had a lot of love, plenty to eat, but that was about the extent of it. But he said, I've never known a Baptist pastor that had much money, so I don't want to go that way. So he resisted that calling for many years. So at the age of 40, we had 3 children. He did surrender to that call. He was just a miserable person until he was able to do that. So we sold our business, sold our home, sold our motor home, and then we went back to school to get a degree in theology.
And where was that?
Out in Graceville, which is the Florida Baptist school there. Mm-hmm. And then we've had a number of churches after that.
And were they mostly in this part of Florida?
Yes. We pastored over in Mayo. We started out at a small church in Cottondale, Florida, which was not far from the school. So he was going to school and pastoring. And then he actually retired after quite a few years from First Baptist Perry. And I was really hoping that we would be able to just take some time. We had a place up in the mountains, so I wanted to go up there and kind of stay long term. But and we tried that, but the telephone would keep ringing. Brother Larry, can you do this? We would like for you to do this. And he just could not resist. So we ended up coming back home.
And was home was in Mayo then?
Actually, Day, which is only 5 miles from here. And he ended up accepting an interim at First Baptist Madison, which we thought would probably be 3-4 months. They were looking for a pastor, but they just really were hoping that he would take that position. But he just felt like they had started that search. They needed to complete that search and find exactly the right one for them. So we ended up there 1.5 years. Mm-hmm. So that was actually our last, you might say, full-time position. We did interims after that, which I love doing interims. We could get to know the people, love the people, enjoy them, but we didn't have to get involved in all of the church business and decisions that they made. Mm-hmm.
Well, tell us about your 3 children.
Larry and I had 3 children. Lynn is our oldest. She was born when we moved to Brunswick, Georgia, so we call her our Georgia Peach. She's an Allstate insurance agent out in West Florida. Our oldest son is Larry Jr., and he went back to the restaurant business, which he was raised in, and he's with a group that own a chain of Wendy's. So he's around, he travels some, but they actually live over in between Live Oak and Lake City. My youngest son, Philip, has always been in law enforcement. Went to school for that. He's always been in law enforcement. But he kind of transitioned into corrections some years ago. He's actually head of the, let's see, what would you call it? Special operations for corrections in the state of Florida.
Oh, wow.
So he travels quite a bit too.
I'm sure he does.
Yeah, he's interesting. Has a lot of stories.
I bet he does.
Yeah.
And I believe you have some grandchildren?
We do. We have 5 granddaughters, some school teachers. One's an assistant principal. We have, let's see, an RN. We have one grandson who's in law enforcement. 3 of them are out in West Florida, and 3 of them were over in the Mayo area. But pretty much all grown now, mostly married. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned something about grandchildren?
Great-grands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great-grands, yes.
Yeah.
And yes, some?
We actually have 4. Yeah. We have, in fact, they're all 4 out in West Florida. And they're 3 girls and one boy. The little boy was born back on January the 12th, which was my husband's birthday.
Oh, how special.
Yeah, it really was. First great-grandson and on his birthday.
Well, you mentioned your daughter as being an insurance agent. Didn't she follow kind of in your...
She did.
Tell us about your career.
I guess that kind of runs in our blood. When I got out of school, I was always in insurance. It was just the thing that I truly loved. It was a service I felt to many people. But I ended up working, started out with a company in Jacksonville, but it was at their corporate office. But then later on, I went into State Farm, which many people are familiar with. And I actually was in the office here in Live Oak, Florida. Then as my husband moved with his ministry, State Farm was very generous and would move me to wherever they could use me. So I ended up in Gainesville, retired from State Farm. That was a lot of really informative, good years. It gave me a chance to meet many people outside the church. But yeah, it was a good occupation.
And then I believe you started another business.
I did. After I retired from State Farm, I didn't feel like I was quite through working. Larry was still pastoring, and I had become just very interested in, I guess as you get older, you become more interested in health issues. And I ended up, I bought a franchise for Curves, which was a women's fitness program. And my business was over in Perry, Florida. And during that time, I went back to school and got some, a little more education in nutrition and kinesiology. I loved that business. I just thrived with it. Just making a difference in ladies' lives, different than I had in the ministry. This was more of a physical aspect, but it gave me a real opportunity to connect with them on many different levels. There was a lady doctor over in Perry that actually came by to see me one day, and she said, I just wanted to come by and meet you and see what y'all were doing here. She said, I'm having patients, my lady patients come in, and all of a sudden they're improving, and it's nothing that I've done for them. It's not medication I've given them or encouragement that I've given them, but what they're telling me that's happening here is making the change in them. So I continued that until my mother's health began to fail. She lived in Ponte Vedra, and I was making many trips from this area of Florida to Ponte Vedra on a weekly basis. And that was about close to maybe a 3-hour drive. So I had to make a choice. I couldn't continue to do that and run a business. And I thought, well, I only have one mother. The business I can go back to later on. So there was a young lady that worked for me. her mother-in-law had the Curves franchise in Pensacola. So she worked with her, and they immediately bought my franchise and left me free to go on and do what I needed to do. So at that point is when I moved my mother here to the village.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how long was she here?
She was in Dowling House about 2 years, and then she moved on to Dossier and the nursing home for another 3 years.
Well, I know that you are still involved in things like Curves, so you want to tell us about how you spend time now that the Copeland Center is back up?
Well, I do. I was just really drawn to that because I just so much, I enjoy it personally, but I also enjoy, seeing the other people that find something that they can use from it. But I do an arthritis swim class Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Makes a huge difference for me. I can go out of town for a week or 10 days, and I can tell the difference when I get back. I've not done those movements that it takes to keep moving. I enjoy having the structure of it. I base my whole week on that Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning.
Well, I'm glad the pool is back open for you and others to do that. I'm sure that was a long time in coming.
Yeah, that 6 or 8 weeks closure was agony. Yeah.
And you volunteer some at the village? Share with us what you're doing.
I used to do quite a few tours, but of course this last year we've not been doing those. I've always worked at the rustic shop, volunteered there. I actually started doing that before I actually moved here. Myra Webb, who runs the rustic shop, she was actually in one of our churches over in Mayo. And when she found out that I had bought a house here, she came directly to my house in Day and said, I need you at the rustic shop. So I do that every week. I really enjoy it. I've done a number of one-time volunteer things, the health fair, birthday party, just different things that need to be done at certain times. Yeah, but it's busy around here.
And you can be as busy as you want or not too much.
Right.
And that's, to me, special for a lot of people.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
When you were talking about you early on, as a young person, you thought you had a call to ministries.
I did.
What are some other life-changing experiences that you've had? Or particularly where you knew the Lord was involved in those?
Yeah. When I was on staff at Glorieta Baptist Assembly, that was all summer, and they put together a trip for the staffers. There was probably a dozen of us, and we had several chaperones, and they took us on a truck ride, I called it, because we all sat in the back of the truck. It was long, it was way up into the mountains, but they took us to a place where they put us on horses. And I thought my experience with horses is so small I could put it in a thimble. But they showed me what to do, and we rode for the rest of the day to the Pecos Wilderness. They taught much about silence in our lives and peace, and to just ride for hours and hours and hear nothing but the horses. And then once we got there, they provided us with blankets, and we were so exhausted they didn't have to tell us to lay down. And we actually spent the night on the ground in a blanket, just all huddled up together. The next morning, we just prayed and we sang, and we just enjoyed each other's company, and it was like one heart. We all had the same things on our minds. And then, of course, the next day was our trip back. So that was quite an experience for a young girl from Florida who had never much been in the mountains, and we were way up in the mountains. So yeah, that always sticks out in my mind.
And has the practice of silence been something important to you based on
It
that?
really has, and it is part of my life. I know a number of people that they always have to have somebody around. They're very social, and once I come through the door at my house, sometimes I don't hear a thing. I don't even have to have the TV on. When I bought my house, the one thing that I really wanted was a screened enclosure on the back of it. So I was able to get that built, and that is a real special place for me. I sit out there, and here in the village, even though there's a home directly in back of me, it's as though we're way out in the woods and there's nobody around. And it sometimes is just pure silence.
You know, that's probably the main selling feature to me of my house.
Really?
I have a small screened-in back porch.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from growing up in Florida.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you have to have a porch, and that's why we call this Front Porch Conversations.
Yes.
But
That's true.
It's also a great place for silence and reflection.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
And right now, early in the morning, the birds are just glorious.
Unless it's freezing, I start my morning out there every day.
And luckily, most of the mosquitoes can't get in right now.
Not now.
Not now.
Yes, that's true.
What are some of the other things that you enjoy doing? Hobbies or special interest?
I love to cook. I absolutely do. I love to cook, and I love to share what I cook. During this last year of the pandemic, that's probably been one of the hardest things for me because I cook for my family almost every weekend. Whoever can come. Sometimes it's just some of the grandkids, sometimes it's all of them. But I've not been able to do that, so I really miss that. But I enjoy cooking and sharing with my neighbors. I always seem to find that and I think that comes from ministry too. As a pastor's wife, that was always, something that I could do. My husband could do many more things for them than I could. But I could make sure that they had food in the house. And I've just always enjoyed that. I love to sew. Believe it or not, I love to clean house.
Well, I'm glad you do. It's not on my list of things I love to do.
Yeah. My kids used to tease me about how, I must have drove them crazy as kids because I like neatness. And I just love to clean behind them. So they still tease me about that.
If your grandchildren were asked what is the best thing their grandma cooks, what would they say? Or their favorite?
Every one of them has something different. I actually was talking to my youngest granddaughter who's in college, and her birthday is this week. And so we were trying to figure a time to get together. And I thought, and she goes to college, but she works part-time over in Gainesville. So I thought, well, maybe I would go over and just have her meet me at maybe the Conestoga or someplace as soon as she got off from work. But it turned out that she didn't just come right out and say it, but she really wants me to cook. So next week, one day, I'm going to cook and take it over to their house in Mayo. And she told me two of the things that she wants me to fix. Meatloaf, and I have fixed these green beans in the oven with bacon and onions and other things. She wants those. And she's just, if she comes to my house, she thinks I should have a dip of some sort, some kind of dip. So I guess we'll figure out a dip. But they all have different things.
What's your favorite thing to prepare?
Gracious. I guess I could say everybody in my family. I have several, one of my sons and my grandson and my son-in-law, they all hunt. So I almost always have venison in my freezer. So they have a meal that they like, and it's cubed venison and gravy with rice and vegetables, and they all enjoy that.
Well, it sounds good. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to doing? Maybe now that we can travel some.
I've really had a really good opportunity to travel. My mom and dad really thought that was important. Larry and I were able to travel quite a bit. We took our children with us, and then we traveled some ourselves, in the country, out of the country. I think I can almost say I'm kind of finished with out of the country right now. I don't have a desire to do that. One thing that I haven't done that I truly would like to do before it's over with is the redwood forest.
Oh, yes.
And I've not been there, and I truly want to go. But I still enjoy a trip up to the mountains. There's some hiking trails that I still enjoy doing. The long ones I don't do much anymore.
Right.
But the other ones I still enjoy doing. Yeah.
What's some advice you've given your children and grandchildren that you'd like to share with a young person today?
I think really be true to yourself. No matter what your desires are or what direction you want to go. But always consider the fact that the Lord needs to be in that decision, whatever you do. And it just needs to have purpose.
Well, that certainly seems to be the way you've spent your life. Sharing with others and being purposeful about it.
Yeah.
I think you're a wonderful example of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Anything else you want to share with our viewers today?
I would like to say that the village is just an amazing place. I've heard people consider it a diamond in the rough, and I think that is very true. You drive for a long distance and you wonder, where are you going? Nothing but woods. And then all of a sudden you turn in and there's a city in itself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Diane,
You're
for joining
welcome.
us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. And we'll have another Front Porch Conversation soon.